Boa noite a todos e todas. Espero que todos estejam bem, com saúde. Estamos aqui em mais um momento, né, de conhecimento, né, que a gente procura, nós do Instituto de Geociências e Engenharias, procuramos estar trazendo não só para a comunidade acadêmica do IGE, mas para a comunidade da Unifesp em geral, né? E no dia de hoje, especificamente, a gente vai tentar abordar dois temas que estão intimamente ligados, né, e estão em alta nos últimos tempos, a questão da diversidade e da acessibilidade, né? E dentro desses dois temas, né, o foco da palestra de hoje, né, o desenho universal, tá? Que busca, na verdade, né, estabelecer com que projetos, produtos e processos, né, sejam pensados, né, para atingir a todos e a todas, né, indistintivamente, né, independente de tudo, tá? Então, é uma abordagem super interessante, né, também está sendo cobrada para estar sendo inserida nos currículos dos cursos de engenharias e arquiteturas, né? E dessa forma a gente resolveu trazer para poder falar um pouco, né, sobre o desenho universal dentro do ensino das engenharias, né? A professora Sharon Joines, a professora Sharon, ela é da Universidade Estadual da Carolina do Norte, tá? Antes de apresentá-la, né, vai fazer parte junto comigo aqui na condução do evento o professor Cláudio Basquerotto. Professor Cláudio,
Olá, Valdez,
bem-vindo.
boa noite.
Agradeço desde já a disponibilidade, Cláudio, em estar junto conosco aqui na condução do evento.
Satisfação participar com todos vocês e participar aí com a professora Sharon, uma noite aí maravilhosa que será muito produtiva para nós.
E a gente conta, né, para palestrar sobre o desenho universal, a professora Sharon, né? A professora Sharon, ela tem bacharelado em engenharia industrial, ela é mestre em engenharia industrial, um PhD em engenharia industrial e ergonomia, todos pela Universidade Estadual da Carolina do Norte. Ela é professora associada de desenho industrial, na NCSU. Ela é diretora do Laboratório de Pesquisa em Ergonomia e Design. A professora Sharon tem pesquisa focada em quantificar a interação entre indivíduos com diversas habilidades, produtos e seu ambiente. Tá? Então, welcome, Professor Sharon.
Thank you.
Before it all, we would like to thank you to accept the invite to be here with us. This moment is very important to our institute and our university. Okay, I made a little introduction about you. I said little because your CV is very extensive. Okay. Now, please take the control. Feel so free to start your presentation. Thank you again, Professor Sharon.
Thank you. And so I have a great appreciation for your interest in universal design, and I really appreciate being here today to talk to you guys about this. I was introduced to universal design when I joined the College of Design back in 2006. However, my degrees, all of my degrees are in industrial engineering. So I received an engineering education here at NC State. And when I graduated with my PhD, I went to work and went to work with companies that were trying to improve their products and processes. And I realized that the problems that they were having were either a function of poor communication or miscommunication or poor design. And so I came to the College of Design in order to help them explore better human-centered design using the ergonomic training that I had. And at that time I joined the college. The Center for Universal Design was still in existence. And so I was able to work with some of the original folks who had worked at the Center for Universal Design. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I want to start off this presentation with you guys trying to imagine something and just, you know, think in your mind's eye as you wake up in the morning, if the alarm clock was blaring and you couldn't see the controls and you couldn't figure out how to turn it off, and it was jarring. It was just an unpleasant way to wake up. And then as you were trying to make your way to go get your breakfast, you stumbled and you fell because you couldn't see the stairs, and they weren't well marked. And then after that, you went in to get your breakfast, and you were trying to open up maybe the jam jar or the jelly jar, and it was so tight that it actually made your hands hurt, and you could just barely get it open. So, you know, only a few minutes into your day, you've already had 3 bad experiences. Now, what if this were to continue all day, right? For many people, that they're faced with difficulties, and those difficulties are really man-made challenges. You know, if you woke up naturally by the sun, it wouldn't be jarring. If you were in you know, a place that didn't have steps that were constructed, it wouldn't be difficult for you. And if you were to eat fresh fruit, you wouldn't have to open that hard jar. So we're often confronted by man-made challenges. So the solution is potentially universal design. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about what universal design is, just as a brief introduction to get a floor underneath everybody so that we have some common understanding, and talk about the definition and some context, the context in the United States, and talk about principles and guidelines. And as we talk through the principles and guidelines of universal design, I'll go through quite a few examples, and then talk about why it's important. Then after we've talked about universal design, I want to talk to you about what you can do as an educator or in an educational environment. Talk about a framework for impacting engineering curriculum, content and delivery, and how you can influence your students' process to engineer universal design solutions for society. Because ultimately, you know, we're trying to, our product, you know, from our universities are our students, in addition to any research or publications that you have. But we're trying to produce good stewards. And hopefully the engineers that you guys produce will be able to create universally designed solutions. So let's get going on this discussion of what universal design is: the design of products and environments to be used by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So that's quite a statement. You know, that's a very unique and special thing, I think, to think about creating designs and environments that can be used by everyone without the need to create adaptation. There are a lot of different terms out there. I think part of working interdisciplinary in an interdisciplinary fashion is to acknowledge the different terms so that we're all on the same page. Ergonomics is the study of the human body, right? Adaptable design is something that can convert, right? It can be one thing and then it can convert and behave in another way. Accessible design is strictly something that has been done sort of after the fact in order to provide people with physical disabilities access, okay? And universal design is other than that, but these are all different types, different entities. Adaptable design is really for a specific user group, whereas ergonomics is focused on the workplace and on industry. Universal design is also called design for all. You're designing for all people and all places. Universal design is market driven. There's not legislation around it. Accessible design in the United States is legally mandated. And adaptable design is, you can have legal help, but it's also customer driven. So they're all different terms that you'll hear. Sometimes people use them interchangeably, but they really are different concepts with different foci. So to give a more specific example, on the left there, you can see that somebody has provided a ramp. So that one is adaptable, right? So they've adapted something so that somebody can get in there who has a physical disability. In the center, that's actually a building on campus. It's the SAS building, and you can see that you could either walk up the steps, straight up the steps and go into the building, or you could walk all the way around the bricks, and then you could roll up one ramp across and then up another ramp. So this one is accessible. So it is intended, and it was built, constructed, designed such that somebody with varied needs could use it. And then on the right, you see a universal design. And in the United States, this was actually taken outside of Harris Teeter, which is a grocery store. It's a popular food chain in the United States. And you'll find that there is these types of entrances in almost all of our grocery stores. So interestingly, I think it's because they have the cart and they expect you to roll your cart in and buy a whole bunch of food and then roll it back out to your car, that they have decided to do it this way. But it is one of the most pervasive uses of universal design, to the point where when I ask people for examples, a lot of times students don't even think about it, because some of our best examples of universal design are so ingrained that we don't even see them as designs. We just expect them to be there. And so that's when you really hit the nail on the head, is when people can't even hardly point them out. I want to give you guys a quick history about the emergence of, or how we got to universal design in the United States. And it all began back in the 1940s. And that was, I'm sure, before you guys were born. It was before I was born, but it's still recent history for us. It's where human factors started because of the complexity of the interiors of aircraft. And they had a hard time really getting people to take that information in. So the field of human factors began to emerge, and as did better medical care. As a part of that improvement, and I'll put quotes around that, improvement in medical care, people with disabilities were put in hospitals that we would refer to as institutions. So they were sent away, and they were put in and sort of put off to the side rather than being at home. Then we get to the 1950s and we start to deinstitutionalize some of our healthcare and try and reintegrate people with disabilities back into society. And we come up with this notion of what was referred to as barrier-free design. And you can see on the right there what we would call adaptable design now, but it's barrier-free design, the idea that somebody could just roll straight into their front door. In the 1960s, we start referring to it as accessible design, and we have the first Paralympic Games, which was celebrated even with a stamp. By the 1970s, there starts to become a movement and a synergy around this idea of standing up for others who can't stand up for themselves, right? So it's a little tongue-in-cheek about standing up for people with disabilities, because they were referring to people with physical disabilities, but they really mean standing up for everyone who is outside of the mainstream. In the 1980s, a gentleman named Ronald Mace, who was an architect by training, and worked here at NC State in the College of Design. He had polio when he was a child, and as he was post-polio, he used a wheelchair. to get around. And he started the Center for Accessible Housing, and it was one of our largest grants that we received from the federal government. And that emergence of the Center for Accessible Housing shifted to become the Center for Universal Design, because it was at the Center for Universal Housing that people came together and started talking about this. It wasn't until the 1990s, right? And now we're getting into the territory, so I think even you guys are probably starting to remember the 90s. It was then that the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed by the President Bush Sr. And I think that a lot of people are very surprised that the ADA wasn't signed until the 1990s. I think they expected it to be a lot earlier, but that was when that was the law that said we had to accommodate people with disabilities, and we had to make reasonable accommodation. It did not talk about universal design, but it was definitely a step in the right direction, and it was something that we had fought for many years. And then by the time you get to the turn of the century, you start to see a lot of universal design conferences and expositions, and people start to really jump on the bandwagon. And that's partially due to Apple products. And interestingly, that the Apple products in their platform, they have a lot of accessible features, and any app that is going to go on an Apple product is going to have to meet some very high thresholds. And they really shifted a lot of things for people with disabilities in order to have access. I was initially very concerned when we went to these flat phones because they were smooth, and I was concerned that people were not going to be able to feel the buttons on the phone. And I was used to the old flip phone, and one of the women that I worked with was blind and deaf, and she, when I first met her, she was blind and still had her hearing. And I was talking about how frustrated I was with these phones, the fact that they didn't have any tactile sensitivity, that you couldn't really tell. And she was like, "Oh, you're so wrong. These are designed so well." And then she showed me how she was able to use it with no sight because it had been so well designed. And others were following suit with all the social media. They were starting to follow suit with Apple. Apple was so big that they really, from a market perspective, they really shifted things for people with varied abilities. And then we started in the 2010s, we started to recognize and try and support individuals, not just with physical disabilities, but a lot of other abilities. And we started seeing different levels of immersion, right, from screens and movie theaters to then, things that you would wear on your head. And then in 2020, as we all know, the pandemic hit. And we all went home for an extended period of time in the United States. Things just sort of, everybody folded up shop and went home. And a person that I know who is a homebound individual with chronic illness, was just sort of like, "Well, welcome to my world. Everybody's so upset about going home and being locked in their house. And that's the way I've been living for 10 years, right?" But there were other things that were going on too in our society in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, and trying to make sure that we were not putting undue burden on certain segments of our society, which has been a problem in the past. So, I think by this point we had expected to be emerging from this pandemic. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but I see our designs are moving forward, and engineers and computer software designers are rising to the challenge of creating programs like Google Meet and Zoom, and they're just leapfrogging ahead with the solutions that are helping us keep going, and solving problems for people. and connecting people, and people who, that haven't been connected in a long time are becoming connected again as a result of the pandemic. So we can make some good things out of some of these challenges. So let's talk about how universal design works. There's 7 principles for universal design, about equitable use, about things being flexible in the way that they can be used, that they should be simple and intuitive, that the information should be perceptible, meaning you should be able to discern it and understand it. There should be tolerance for error, so that you don't have bad consequences if you make a mistake inadvertently. Things should require low physical effort, and there should be size and space for approach and use. And so associated with each one of these principles is the idea of some guidelines, right? So equitable use is that the design is, not only is it useful, but it's also marketable to people with diverse abilities. And that's a very important thing, because if you think about when you were a little kid, you wanted to have the same stuff as everybody else, right? You didn't want to be the odd man out. And it's true as we age. We don't want to have to have something separate and distinct for ourselves. We want it to be something that everybody would want. So there are guidelines here about providing the same means when possible. If it's not identical, then at least equivalent. Avoid segregating and stigmatizing any users. That very much has a very strong meaning in the United States, because there was a time where we were segregated based on our race. And we stigmatized Black Americans by making them use different, separate but equal idea that was inappropriate. And we would even make them go around to a different side of the building. So this is a very important concept to have in this guideline. We also want to make sure that there are provisions for privacy, security, and safety. It should be available to all the users. And that speaks to, how vulnerable some people are. And if you are a person who has varied abilities, you often can be concerned for your security and your safety. And then making sure that the design is appealing, right? So here we have a very appealing design where the person who's riding in the wheelchair, he's an architect who also used to work at the Center for Universal Design. But it's also very useful for the person who has a baby stroller. And I know that on campus, we have a lot of kids who are very excited when we improve our accessibility and we improve our universal design around campus. And they use them with their bikes and their skateboards, and we try and explain to them that, not to tear it up. This is a picture I think that I took when I was in the Louvre, and you can see there are a tremendous number of stairs, right? But there's a ramp that is right intermixed, right in the middle of it. And so if you were a person who could not traverse steps, then you wouldn't have to be separated or go somewhere else in order to move from one space to the other. Here's another example. The idea that some people can stand and are very tall and can bend over and to get a drink of water. This is actually in a building that we've recently renovated and has been given to the college. And the nice thing is that, not only do they support the people who can't bend over very far by having the tall water fountain, but then they're also supporting the people who need to roll up, and maybe they're better off with a bottle and a straw or something like that. And so all of these are right there together, and people don't have to have a distinction there. Here you can see the laptop is equally as easily used by somebody who is an adult or a child. It might be a little bit harder for some older adults, depending on their technological savviness. But here's an example of where we have something that's very high tech. We, invented or we developed these scanners after 9/11, after the World Trade Towers were bombed, and so we have everybody in the US goes through these scanners, right? And all over the world, people are going through these scanners, and for most people, it's not a big deal. You don't even really think about it, other than the fact that it's delayed. But what you don't realize, or you may have had this experience, is that the person who is operating the scanner is making a choice when you walk up. And they will actually push, based on a binary construct of gender, male or female. And so when you walk up, it's not like on the left, it's not that the guys go to one and the girls go to another. You go through the same scanner, but the software interprets the body images and what it's scanning. And if it doesn't match what that operator has touched, then the person will be pulled off to the side. Well, for the large majority of the population, that is not a problem. That is a problem, however, and it's a man-made problem for people who are transgendered or not gender non-conforming. And when you think about universal design and not wanting people to feel othered, then this is a very strong example of something that was constructed, and folks are pulled off to the side and they're patted down. And if they have a prosthetic, sometimes they're made to remove that prosthetic, and it's incredibly embarrassing. Whereas if the software designers had maybe had a different approach to it, they may not have created this problem for people who are transgendered or are gender non-conforming. Flexibility in use. So here we're trying to accommodate a wide range of individuals' preferences and abilities. And these are Fisker scissors. They are my favorite scissors. And I just find them to be incredibly functional. They provide as the guidelines would suggest, they provide a choice of the method of use. You can put your fingers in there. You can use it right or left-handed. You don't have to be overly accurate about how you put your hand into the hole versus the old-fashioned, ringed scissors that you have to work to get your fingers in there. You actually don't have to have a thumb to use the Fisker scissors. So it really facilitates your ability to pick up the object and use it by its design. So also providing adaptability to the user's pace. So not making somebody work at somebody else's pace. And the Fisker scissors in this image, there's a little spring that's in there. And so when you depress it, it actually opens it back up so that you can really do a nice job of picking your own pace there. This is an interesting airport area, right, where they want to have something that's flexible. They want people to be able to come up and approach the attendant here, and they want a little writing workspace for the customer. And you can see that if you were in a wheelchair, off to the right, you wouldn't be able to get in very close, but off to the left, you can. And the attendant can get in and out because it actually opens up and it becomes a space that you can walk through. These were some seats that I saw when I was in France, and we were waiting for a train, and you can see that they actually fold away so that the person who has the wheelchair fits right there in the center. Off to the left here is the toilet paper holder that also acts as a handrail. So for people who need extra security when they're getting on and off the toilet, they can grab a hold of that handrail, and they don't have to have the large, bulky looking handrails available or installed. and a very interesting cup there that you can hold in multiple ways, depending on your hands' capabilities. And the flexibility and use of a library, right, that sat empty during the pandemic because we all went home. So we were all at home on Zoom while we were going through the pandemic. But the library ended up, they would ship books to us. So they were flexible. They would ship them right to your home, and they picked up the expense for that. So we had a lot of flexibility during the pandemic in the way we delivered things. Some of the folks that I worked with, because they work for the government, they could only work off of Google Meet. Then the university tended to use Zoom. We have a design camp where students come in every summer, and we actually did a digital design camp, so where people were participating remotely. And so we actually shipped boxes of materials, because normally the campers would come in and they would move on campus for a week. And so it was very immersive. And so we really wanted to try and give them that immersive experience. And to find another way to do that, we ended up shipping the supplies to them. And they were very excited to get those boxes and open them up and see what were in there. And they used Miro boards. It was a great collaborative platform that was quite intuitive and very flexible in the way they could use it. We were flexible in the fact that we were actually renovating space, and sometimes we would have on-campus meetings, and then sometimes we would take those same photos and we would mark them up when we were in our Zoom meetings in order to keep things moving forward. And when we were thinking through the flexibility, and the three pictures off to the right are part of our new space, we wanted to make sure that things were flexible. A lot of things were on wheels so that people could roll into the environment, that they could roll up the things, feel a part of things, and they weren't off to the side. Also, all of the lights in these areas are all dimmable for people who experience migraine, and we didn't want it to be too bright for them. So there's a lot of things built into this to provide flexibility, right? And to afford different types of use. This is the flexibility that we had to have. We had to create for ourselves in order to make sure that our students were being COVID tested. And the interesting thing was that we were, you used to do screen captures and point things out for people just to train them on how to use new software. But we were real time creating things like service indicators so that we could see whether or not people were doing their surveillance testing. So it was a challenge, but it was also very interesting how we leapfrogged through that. Trying to make things simple and intuitive, right? We shouldn't expect people to have a lot of experience or knowledge about a product in order to be able to use it, or even language skills. We also need to think about their current concentration level. And I think that Apple really raised the bar when it comes to people's expectations about users' experience. They really helped universal design in that way, raise everybody's expectations. So eliminating unnecessary complexity and being consistent with users' expectations and their limitations. If you're in the United States, you don't want to put the green light on the top at a stoplight because the red light's supposed to be at the top, and some people are red-green colorblind, right? So you have to be consistent with their expectations so that they aren't fighting themselves trying to figure it out. Also, the United States is a place where we have people from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different countries. And so they come here with varied literacy and language skills. So even the idea of not expecting them to speak English right away is very important. And then providing Effective and prompt feedback is important. I'm sure you've all had the experience while you're trying to do something and your computer's trying to catch up with you, and you keep doing it over and over and over again because you're not getting any feedback. And so you do it multiple times, and then once your computer catches up, you can see that you've done it multiple times. Having prompt feedback when the task is complete is very important, and having it be timely is very important. So simple and intuitive here. Raleigh's not a big city, but NC State is nested in the middle of Raleigh. And so we're an open campus, meaning that anybody in Raleigh can just come and go through. So they wanted to make sure that in case somebody dropped their cell phone, or really even before we had cell phones, if somebody had an emergency, they would be able to get to these phones. They're placed all over campus. They have little blue lights on top. They're labeled emergency. And then you can see there's a big red button that all you have to do is walk up and push the button, and you're automatically connected to our police. And NC State has a police force. Interestingly, that if somebody is pursuing you, all you have to do is touch the button and you can keep going. And if you keep touching the buttons on all the different emergency phones, then they can actually track you and meet you where you're going. So very simple and intuitive. People sometimes try and get cute and they want to do something fun. I was at a bar, and this was the entrance. The image on the left was the entrance to the bathroom. And if you're at a bar and you've been drinking, you might not be overly sure which one to go into based on the way that they were labeled. And so a lot of people just walked into the wrong one. They just walked in to see which one they were going into. The labeling in the center there is more clear. It's clear that it's accessible for somebody to go in if they identify as a woman. And then off to the right, there's also, you can see that there's the sign for men, and it also has a Braille component underneath it too, which is just one step beyond what a lot of folks are doing. All of these different devices are really easy to interact with. My mother does not use computers unless she's forced to. And this little device in the upper left-hand corner, a little Google Duo, my son actually suggested that we buy it for her because it was so simple and so straightforward, and it would be a way for us to connect with her during the pandemic. And so if we were able to get my mother to do it, you knew that is sort of the benchmark for it being simple and intuitive. And you can see these different form factors where people, are creating things that fold, like books, and fold up so that they're easier to store, but then they have more surface area once you get them open. And what you want to make sure is that when we are progressing, that we're not creating problems, right? That we're not leaving people behind. So mobile phones can be used to simulate disabilities, which is a nice thing for those of us in design school. And we want to try different things out and have people have different experiences. Back in, right after the turn of the century, in 2011, mobile device sales overtook computer sales. All around the world, there are more mobile devices than there are computers. And so it's very important that we eliminate the barriers for our mobile devices because it touches so many people. And universal design on mobile devices can really benefit a lot of individuals. In terms of simple and intuitive, this is a Miro board that we had created while we were working with some researchers, and we were working on a project, and all the little colorful squares, I'm zoomed way out on this, we would zoom way in, and we'd work on a particular area for a little while. And so each one of those little things is a Post-it note. It's a digital Post-it note. And so normally with this group of people, we would have gotten together in a room and we would have been using Post-it notes to sort our ideas and look at our goals and the different types of people and the leadership and the timing. and the things that we wanted to keep and get rid of. And we would do it all on Post-it notes, and then we would organize it and we'd move them around. And Miro actually does a great job of replicating that, and was very, very useful for us in the pandemic. Very, very simple and intuitive. And then this is, I've been talking about the web a little bit. This is a pretty low tech thing, but it's also very simple and intuitive. So if you sit in, I think this is from one of my first BMWs, you sit down, and if you put your hand by you sit down in the seat and you put your hand right down, there were two little controls. One control was flat like the seat pan, and the other one stuck up like the backrest. And so you knew if you wanted to control the seat pan, you would move it forward and then the seat would go forward, or you could twist it and you could make the back, the front edge of the seat go up and down, or the back edge of the seat go up and down, and you could adjust the backrest. And it was an incredibly intuitive way to have that control, so that you didn't have to open up your door and look and see which control you were trying to use, which I had to do in my minivan at the same time. So I was very frustrated by that. In terms of perceptible information, you want to make sure that people, that whatever design you have, whatever solution you have, communicates the information regardless of the ambient conditions, right? So if you're out jogging before the sun comes up, because it's hot and you don't want to be out in the heat of the day, you want to be able to use your phone or your watch, right? My watch, actually, it's great. It's a Fitbit. It tracks a lot of my fitness activities, but when I go out in the sun, I can't see it at all. So that's a very imperceptible information. I actually have to take out my phone if I want to see what time it is. And then depending on your sensory capabilities, right? I wear trifocals now, right? They're progressive lenses. And so there are a lot of things now that I can't do unless I have those glasses on. And that's a function of the designs in a lot of cases because of the choices they've made. For example, I can drive my BMW only with my glasses on. That was actually the reason that I got my trifocals. Was because I couldn't tell how fast I was going without setting the cruise, because it would pop up a big number when I'd set the cruise. But I can drive my Miata just fine because the numbers are bigger and I can see them very easily. So you want to make sure that you use different modes of information, right? You want to use pictures and verbal feedback and tactile feedback, and provide that kind of redundant cueing so that people really know and they get that information. And what are your sensory capabilities may differ from somebody else's sensory capabilities, right? People can lose their tactile sensitivity as they age, right? You lose the moisture in your hands, so you can't discern things. So you'll probably see grandparents getting their fingers wet, right? Trying to get that moisture. But you can also lose your tactile sensitivity if you undergo chemotherapy, cancer treatment. One of my friends you had to use a chemo treatment that was called the Red Devil. And apparently, if she didn't sit with her hands and feet in ice buckets during the 4 hours that she got her chemotherapy, she would have lacked all sensitivity and she would have been in great pain. So there are a variety of reasons why people lose their senses or their sensory abilities and lose them or gain them, right? Sometimes they come back. You want to differentiate elements in a way that can be described and so that somebody can have easy instructions. Now if you look under the hood of a car, a lot of times the caps on the different parts of the car where you're supposed to be checking fluids, for example, will be color coded, so that you will know, go to the green cap and, check for this fluid, and go to the yellow cap and check for this fluid. So color coding can be very, very helpful in maximizing legibility to give instructions. This is an example. There were these stoves that were put out in in North America where they had a front burner and a back burner, and then they had a bridge in between. And for until this one, people had a very hard time understanding how were they going to heat up, which one of these things were going to heat up that bridge element. So this is actually a good example. This is the front left, right? And it's only going to heat up the eye if you turn it to onto the left side. If you turn it to the right side, then it'll heat the front element and the bridge. So they do a good job with that because they provide it verbally and pictorially too. We've been exposed to microwaves. And one of the things that I loved about microwaves was the fact that it was sort of a clean surface. And so, if sticky little kids were getting things dirty, I could spray it and wipe it off very cleanly. But I didn't think about the fact that, if you had visual challenges, you would have a hard time distinguishing where you were supposed to be touching. So you can see on the right how they've changed the shape. They've tried to provide some color contrast, and they've also provided a ridge so that they know where to push there. This is in our new building. They've gone a little overboard. We've got trash cans and mixed recycling things everywhere, but they've done a nice job in that the color coding is good. It's consistent throughout the building and throughout the university, and they've even changed the form factor so that you can know what you're throwing something into. You can see that a bottle or a piece of paper goes in here because it's for recycling in the blue, and then the composting in the green. And then, of course, they have instead of lids, because we don't really use the lids, right? They've just stood the lids up in the design, and they actually are providing information in case somebody's not sure what should be composted and what shouldn't. But it's so easy to tell that you can see even before you get into the bathroom in the picture on the right, which one is trash and which one is for composting those paper towels. Very clear from a distance. This is a measuring cup where the technology allows the cup to actually read and provide information about how much is in a cup. And you'll see that there's a lot of universal design that is focused on the kitchen and the bathroom and on transportation, because we're really trying to make sure that people's basic needs are met. And it's one of the challenges of people who are visually impaired, that they actually have, they're likely to have lower income and eat more processed foods and have a poor diet because cooking is so difficult and so dangerous for them. Here are some examples of using color to show temperatures of water. So if you don't have good sensory feedback, my dad didn't after his cancer treatment. He couldn't really tell how hot things were, and he'd scald himself if somebody else wasn't helping him with that. And the picture on the right is redundant cueing, right? Not only do we have the color in the right spot, but we have changes in shape so that if somebody is red-green colorblind, that they could be informed of what to look for. And one of the nice things about some of the first Apple phones that came out, they actually apparently had an app where you could scan the barcode on a product and it would read to you what that product was. And so it was something that wasn't advertised. It wasn't like overly promoted to the general population, but for those who needed it, it was there. And that iPhone became a real lifeline for people in terms of not only being a communication device, but an interaction device. And so what I thought was going to be a really bad trend ended up being something that was wonderful. If you imagine going into a museum, right, and the level of immersion, if you were in a museum, if you were visually impaired, would be very low, right? Because we're really, in most places, we're asked, please don't touch the paintings. Please step back from the paintings, right? People get very upset if you go near most paintings or even sculptures, right? even if they are 3D. Well, these are paintings and pieces of artwork that are intended to be touched and explored and looked at, but also to be experienced by people who with low vision. So you can see there are many different places where universal design can, benefit a person, including in the arts. Even finding your way in a building, right? If you could just tell somebody, go listen for the fountain, head toward the fountain, or I'll meet you by the fountain, right? That would be something that would orient you within a building, within a space, and as a focal point, and is something that everybody enjoys, and it doesn't make people feel awkward. Other examples of good redundant cueing, things that are easy to use, very legible, very well designed, very easy to understand and communicate to somebody where you're going. So the wayfinding and the use is very intuitive. And the use of color contrast for wayfinding has been used for a long time, and to be reinforced with tactile elements to support maps for people to orient themselves, has been used in museums for many years. And then this is the Battery Park City Park that was just recently built and was designed by somebody who is affiliated with our college. And you can see there that it's very large, and they're using a lot of redundant cueing in terms of providing pictures and words and tactile buttons that will read pieces of information to you. So it's a very nice map. This was a facility that was like a little concert hall, and you can see these funny little dots right here that are like little ridges, and it looks sort of silly until you realize that if you look at it from another perspective, those are actually stairs. And so somebody did not think about universal design and sensory abilities when they were designing this. So they had to come back in and retrofit this and put all these little stickers in this beautiful facility that they had just created, because people were falling down these set of stairs because they could not see them because of the dim lighting. So that's an example of something that was very poorly designed. This is a very confusing intersection. There isn't consistency in, the types of materials. There's good use of curb cuts, but there lacks consistency even within the intersection. So a person who was trying to traverse this area might become very easily confused. Tolerance for error, I think, is probably one of my favorite principles. And I know that sounds strange to have a favorite principle, but it really is. The first generation of nail guns did not have to be in contact with something. You just could squeeze the trigger and it would launch the nail guns, right? And so people would play with them. And I have quite a few pictures of, nails in different parts of people from where they got hurt. But now the second generation nail guns, you actually had to depress and hold the nail gun down in order to activate. Again, tolerance for error, so you don't have accidental activation. So the second generation got that much better. So you want to arrange elements to minimize hazards and errors. You want to provide warnings of hazards and errors and fail-safe features to make sure, right? Like before you reformatted your hard drive, you might want to make sure that, you ask people a couple of times, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to reformat your hard drive? I remember I lost 10 years worth of work trying to migrate things from Dropbox to Google Drive because they didn't provide good warnings, and it was all gone. So very discouraging. But you also want to discourage actions that require vigilance in terms of tolerance for error. My favorite thought about tolerance for error is Control Z, right? On your computer, if you just do Control Z, it does undo, right? Undo. And so now in Google Drive, it's just the arrow back, right? Or the arrow forward, redo or undo. And so I love that idea, that digital undo. And I know that plenty of times we've all done it multiple times where you're just sitting there, undo, 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 and you're hitting Control Z multiple times, right? This is, there's a lot of tolerance for error in this car. You know, cars are starting to be loaded with lots of different features to help people drive better. And I'm a person who loves to drive. And that's in the upper left-hand corner, that's actually me. And I think I was going about 120 miles an hour there, just having a great time. And I actually, there's some of the features that correct, you know, for error that I like, and some of them that I don't. And so those I'll turn off. I don't like the one that tells me that I'm too close to the edge of a lane. I want to be able to use the entire lane and drive back and forth and enjoy that car. And I got this car and I hadn't had a straight drive in probably 2 decades. And I was on a hill and I was sitting there and I was waiting. There was somebody who was creeping up close behind me. And I went to go and I was just astounded that the car didn't roll back. And I thought it was my amazing driving ability, only to later realize that that was actually a safety feature. It was a tolerance for error. It actually, the brakes hold until for a couple of seconds until you can get going if you're on an angle. So that was pretty entertaining. Here's, you know, you might not think about tolerance for error when you're cooking, unless you have small children or you have somebody who's older or disabled. You can see the woman on the right there is getting ready to boil some water, and she has her head down very close to an eye, a hot eye. And we did a project where we were watching people with visual disabilities cook, and there were so many near misses that they had no idea how close they had come to being injured while they were cooking. You know, the FAA and with airlines, if you get too close to another airliner in the sky, they report those. They report those near misses. But you know, in our everyday life, we don't report our near misses, even though for some people there are a lot of them. There are tolerance for errors so that you don't walk off and forget and leave something running, like an iron, right? It has an auto shut off feature. And again, we take those kind of things for granted. Just like we do going to the grocery store and having the doors open for us. Here we have, it was a sculpture. This is in the College of Design in our courtyard. And so many people think that that is a little ledge that's meant to be sat on so that people can enjoy the sculpture. And what it really is to provide some tolerance for somebody who can't see it, so they don't walk up and get hurt walking up next to it. Another principle is about low physical effort and making sure that a design can be used comfortably without creating fatigue, right? Because it might be something that you do once a day, but for another person in your same environment, they may end up doing it several times a day. For example, plugging something in. You know, it is, you know, so many inches off the ground in the United States. And for most people, they don't really think about it. But if you are an IT professional, or if you are in housekeeping and you plug and unplug things all the time and you have to bend over every time you want to plug something in, it's a lot of effort, right? So you need to think about the different people who will be encountering a solution and how can you help maintain a neutral body position for them, right? And create reasonable operating forces and reduce repetitive actions. And try not to sustain physical effort, because it only, even if it's only 7% of your physical capability in a muscle, if you do that all day long, that will actually injure a muscle and create problems for the muscle health. So there are lots of examples of different things that are reducing effort. Kneeling buses. I remember I was in Waikiki, Hawaii, when I saw the first kneeling bus, and I was just caught off guard by it. I was with my kids, and I was just enamored with that. And we bought one of these little silly, up in the upper right-hand corner, these Roomba vacuums, just because we were at home all the time, and we wanted to have, the house cleaned while we were working, to improve the indoor air quality, because my daughter has asthma. I was excited because it vacuums underneath the couch. It can get to all sorts of different places. And I love this example of this washing machine that has a slanted drum. To me, it's very frustrating to have to reach in and practically climb into the washing machine or the dryer in order to get things in and out. So I love this idea of a slanted drum. Opening doors should not be difficult. The lever door handle on the left is the industry standard here, and the university standard. The door handles are very expensive, but they're very easy to use. You don't have to have any. You don't have to be able to make a hand. You don't even have to have a hand. You can just use even an elbow or a hip to operate that door handle, versus something like this, right? That's an old-fashioned door handle. It's a crystal door handle, and it's to remind me, about the effort that it took, and the effort it takes to turn something like that. And if it's a little bit wet, it becomes slippery and even more difficult. You have to squeeze even tighter. Very difficult for people who have strength issues or people who have arthritis or pain in their hand. And then there was this interesting door handle off to the right that is very, very long, right? So if you're standing upright, you can reach that door handle. Or if you were a child, you could use the door handle. You wouldn't have to reach up to use it. And then even if you were crawling on the floor, because it was a smoke-filled room, you would be able to get to that door handle. So very interesting. And then, of course, in the middle, again, is the Harris Teeter doors that require no effort. You just walk up and the sensors, they open for you. And we're getting the same way with our faucets, right? That you can just walk up to them and put your hands under them or touch them. You don't have to turn them on. Much easier. Lots of options in the kitchen to support people with various strength capabilities. Whether it's in the center there of pulling out racks in the freezer to bring things closer to you so that you can get to them, or to be able to get to those pots much easier. My husband bought me some cookware, and it's stoneware, and he bought me some cast iron pots, and he's the one who has to clean it and put the Dutch ovens up and away because they're so heavy that I can't even hold them or pick them up or rotate them in order to clean them. And this in the lower right-hand corner is something that we do not have in the United States. I have never seen this in the United States, but I saw it when I was visiting some colleagues in France. And that was an elevated dishwasher. So I don't know if in Brazil you all have elevated dishwashers, but in the United States we don't. And I think it's the silliest thing ever to have to bend all the way over to put the dishes in the dishwasher. I'm not sure why we haven't figured that one out yet. OXO Good Grips is a brand that was started by a gentleman who was watching his wife peel potatoes. She was making mashed potatoes, and she had bad arthritis. And he thought to himself, he didn't think to himself, let me help her, apparently, peel these potatoes. He thought to himself, let me design a better potato peeler for her. And that started this brand. And her arthritis meant that she couldn't close her hand as easily. So it has a larger grip and it has strong grips on the outsides. And It now OXO Good Grips has not only the potato peeler, but a variety of other products. And it's a lovely brand with great accessibility. It's not overly, expensive, so it's useful and accessible to many people. And then there's some interesting approaches to, rethinking why do we have to do things a particular way? If you have a hard time with strength and you're trying to pour milk, a milk jug can be a very heavy thing and a hard thing to get the milk poured into the cup. And so this idea of just being able to push or rotate the jug is a nice idea. Not having to pinch. Pinching is a very difficult thing for some people. And I love the one on the far right there with the to unplug. You can just stick your finger right in and pull it out, which would probably save people from reaching over and just grabbing the cord and pulling the cord out, and would save some electronics. So nice examples there. Low physical effort, a nice light chair that is very stable. The woman can get her feet underneath it. She can push her with her hands to help herself raise or lower, but even a child could pick it up. So it's a nicely designed outdoor chair. The final principle is size and space for approach and use. And this is the idea that you want to make sure that things are laid out in a way that they are easy to reach, regardless of the person's body size or posture or their mobility. And you want to make sure that when you're doing that you provide clear line of sight for people and make sure that all the components are comfortable for somebody who is seated or standing, right? My desk is actually a height adjustable desk. So when I get tired of sitting for a while, I can actually stand for a while, but a variety of people could come in and use this desk and it could be height appropriate for them. And then you also want to make sure that there's adequate space for the use of their assistive devices or a personal assistant if that's needed. You can see this house, this is somebody's personal home, and the way they have designed their gardens and their front entrance, they can roll right up to the front door. They're in a covered space. They can set their groceries down, take their time. They feel safe and secure. They can see well around them. Lots of good access. This is Park Shops. This is on campus, and you can see that they use the changing slope of the road and the terrain, and then they've made this little area that is both for bikes and for wheelchairs, and created an overhang. And in the alcove, and there's a little seat to give people a rest before, if they need some time to transition between going in and out. And they're in a protected area, but it's a well-lit area too. Here you can see our emergency phones are all over our campus, but you can see that we leave spaces between the benches so that if somebody wants to roll up and be a part of the conversation, they feel welcome and included, and that they can roll right into the building on this side, that it is a universally designed entrance. It's not just accessible or adaptable. And then in our coffee shop in that same building, you can see that there's a variety of bar height. People can stand if they're not up. Some people have a hard time sitting down and lowering themselves. They don't have that knee strength. They have bad knees. So they actually want to sit at a tall bar. Or somebody who wants to roll up and be a part of the conversation, there are the lower tables also. So they try and provide a variety of options. And one of the things that a friend of mine who is a wheelchair user has said to me is that, with the social distancing requirements, and people having to sit 6 feet apart during the pandemic, it has made things a lot easier for them. Because things aren't packed in so tight. And so they're hoping that they hope things will go back, to normal in terms of health. They're hoping that everything doesn't go back to the same density that it was before, because it made their lives difficult. here, somebody's rolling through to get on a subway. It's very nice design. It's also very helpful if you are carrying luggage or dragging luggage behind you. Here in the middle is, although this device and has a place for somebody to have their feet, if they were using a wheelchair, they really have a hard time seeing the screen, and they certainly can't see the keyboard. So you'd have to be a touch typist. Off to the right, they made an effort to tilt the screen so that somebody who was seated could see the screen, whether they were standing or seated, but they didn't think about how difficult it would be for them to reach. So that if they had maybe just put those items down a little bit closer, it would have been easier for them to be able to use that. And it makes you wonder, with that design, who did they test that with, right? Why is it that before it was built and manufactured, why did they not figure that out? And it's because they have some blind spots, right? It's not part of their process. This was at the Louvre, and there are no arms on this couch, so that if you're in a wheelchair and you are tired of sitting in your chair, you can easily transition onto this couch. You don't have to have any difficulty of armrests in the way. And then again, lots of good, easy transitions, some interesting, an interesting car door arrangement there to make it easy to get things in and out, wheelchair or stroller. And a nicely designed kitchen that has multiple height counters, lots of clear space, different height ovens, a low microwave, all so that the person, a variety of people and people with different capabilities can use this space. This is a very interesting area. Everything is within reach for her. You can see that, she doesn't have to roll back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in order to get what she needs to. Pretty much everything is set up within arm's reach for her. A very nice design. And in the lower right-hand corner, there's a dimmable light switch that a gentleman is using. And I have often wondered, why our light switches aren't just a little bit lower and our outlets aren't just a little bit higher. I think that would make things a lot easier on people. A while back, we got into the idea of, getting in and out of the tub is very risky. And so if you could walk in and out, that's helpful. It's helpful to have things that you can hold on to as you're walking in and out. But it's also helpful to be able to roll into a shower, because not everybody's going to be able to walk into a tub, or they're going to need to get out of the tub rapidly. And so you can see that this one has a trench drain, right? So it's not going to have the water leaking back out. And obviously there would be a shower curtain there, but it's not there for the picture. So now to the idea of what can you do, right? So we've talked a lot about universal design, the principles, examples of universal design. And, when we think about universities and we think about, we have lots of policies and just different attitudes within a university. We have places and spaces, classrooms, reading rooms, computer labs, maker spaces, our curriculum courses, these are all different things that as professors you interact with and you have to work on. So a lot of times people ask the questions, do we teach our students about universal design? And does some of our content or our assignments focus on universal design? And so that is sort of that first pass when people are talking about engaging with universal design. And generally, when we talk about, do we teach our students about universal design, they're talking about do we have a course on it? Or is it a portion of a course? Or do we have some assignments that focus on universal design? But you can see it's in a very small portion of the area that is in our purview as academics, right? So that's a frequent approach. Then we would talk about accessibility, right, in the place and space area. And you would say, well, that's probably a university issue. That's probably not a departmental issue. You might think about the accessibility of courses, but not everybody does. And then you might think about universal design when you're talking about assignments, but that's generally the long and the short of it there on the first pass when people are trying to infuse and talk about teaching universal design to their students. But I would suggest that we take a different framework and we ask better questions. Okay, so what if we thought about universal design across all of those different parameters, right? Across policies, across our attitude and places and spaces, all the way down to how we give feedback and how we provide our assessments. What if we took a universal design approach to all of those? And then what if we answered the questions, do our students develop processes that drive solutions for a varied population? Because ultimately that's what you want them to do, right? When they graduate and they're engineers out in the world and they are creating solutions and they are creating places and processes and experiences and they are creating your society, right? Especially the online spaces. We want them to have a process by which they naturally create solutions that are useful and usable for a varied population. And then I think we'll ask another question. Not just what is our product, right? How are our students going out the door? But does it support your varied student population? So do all of these different attributes, right, of your university, your policies, places, curriculum, courses, do they support your varied student population? Do you think about the idea that your students may be blind or have cognitive limitations or have different sensory capabilities, have different approaches to learning? So does the way that you're framing things, the way that you're creating things, are you supporting your students? So are you creating a good product, but are you supporting them while they're here? And I think that that is a very different framework. So if you want to take the approach, are we developing students that will have a good process when they graduate? You have to look at every component of it, right? Same is true. You can look at each component for supporting your students, right? So let's separate those out a little bit and let's focus on what we can do with each one of these. In terms of policies and attitudes, you can look across your courses and curriculum for themes and create UD specific assignments, but you need to think about your engagement, right? And provide multiple points of engagement. You need to provide multiple means of actions to express what they're learning. The assignments should clearly articulate that universal design must be considered. So have some assignments that are UD specific, but then in your other assignments, say, we're still going to consider universal design. That's part of what we're doing. That's part of the expectations. Have universal design discussions as a part of your critique and your feedback sessions, because generally things are iterative. When you're producing something, when you're producing a product or you're building something, you don't go in and just do it the first time. You create something, you create a prototype, and you get feedback on it, and you critique it. And universal design should be a part of that. And asking students to acknowledge who is being excluded by their solution or their design is a very good way to help change people's attitudes by asking them to articulate it of who they are excluding, because normally they just talk about this is a reasonable bound that those folks are outside the norm, and so we can't accommodate everybody. But if we focus on asking people to articulate who's being excluded, it can really turn things on its head. And then creating UD components in your assessment rubrics. You've got to learn about the challenges, but you also have to learn about solutions, right? What is universally designed today in 10 years will be considered out of date or may become irrelevant. So learning about the challenges and the solutions is important. You need to consider the principles, but you also need to consider the people, right? So who is your intended user? Who is the person that you plan on using this? But then you also need to think about the unintended users. And that's a variety of people. And that can be true with your policies too. You can be trying to help students with your policies, but you can actually create and make life difficult for your staff and your department heads and a lot of other people. So you've got to really do a 360 and look at the variety of stakeholders as you're coming forward with your policies, so that you can get people to have the right attitude and develop a good solution development process, understanding that there are going to be constraints, but you've got to have constraints and evaluate and then go iterate back and forth. Look at the physical and the software components, right? Just like the one on the right. Not only should he be able to see the screen, he should be able to interact with the screen, get good feedback from the screen, and be able to reach things. The other thing is, you guys are creators of educational space, right? You may not be building buildings for your educational space, but you are probably at some point going to be purchasing some new equipment. You're going to be purchasing furniture to go into that space as your furniture gets worn out. So you're consumers, and you are creating that educational space. When you buy the light fixtures and you specify the light bulbs and those kinds of things, do you have ways for people to roll in and out? Do you have multiple means of egress? Is the place and the space inviting, and do people feel like they belong? Making sure that people feel like they belong is very important. We bought outdoor furniture shortly before the pandemic, trying to make sure that we were interacting and collaborating, and it ended up being a wonderful place where it was outdoor and we could get fresh air and people could sit in a covered space. The areas off to the two pictures off to the right are in that new space that we've just created. The bottom one is a jury room where we have lots of, we call them skittle colored tables and chairs because they're a rainbow of colors. But all of the light fixtures in the studio up top and the jury room down below, they're all dimmable. So that if we need to control that light, or if somebody is not feeling well, or if somebody has migraine, then we can dim those for them. We invested in roller shades to make sure that, because this is a southern facing wall, to make sure that we could dim that and control the natural light. Our students spend a lot of hours in studio. They joke about the lights never go off in the School of Design. We're trying to make our students go home and, get rested and get good sleep. We're trying to break that habit. But they do spend long hours in studio, so we want to make sure that it's a good place for them. Think about your curriculum and your courses. Will the objects and the processes and the systems that you are asking them to design and develop, will they distribute benefit, or will they distribute harm across society, right? Are they going to make things better for most people and worse for some others? Are they going to make things worse for the people who are normally marginalized? That's not the way it should be. We should make things better for all. And then, does it need to be made more inclusive, or should it not be made at all? For example, when, we are very frequently making, creating profiles in different accounts. And for many of us, this doesn't seem like a big deal. But, does the drop-down menu of an interface affirm or deny a person's identity, even in profile creation, right? And if you think about that cis-normative binary gender construct, right? People cannot feel included, right? So should it be male, female, not specified? Should you not be specified? Or is there another way to do it? Are there, can they question and come up with something, an alternative to the binary gender menu assignments? Who's being included? And why do people need to be excluded? Are you requiring your students to think about who will be excluded if they test their sample with people who are convenient to them? Their friends and relatives, the people who are sitting next to them, the people who look just like them, right? So if you're creating an artificial intelligence algorithm, right, an AI algorithm, and you're trying to get it to learn, and you're testing it on people just like yourself, or with a data set that looks just like yourself, it's going to learn really well, right? They can create a great algorithm that learns and performs very, very well on that data set. But what if that data set is not representative of the people in Brazil? Or it's not representative of the people in the world, and they want to be able to sell it all across the world, right? It's a global economy. So ask your students, should you be including other people in your test bed, in your data set, right? Because if you train on pale male data sets for AI, then they're probably not going to perform very well for Black women. So we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions about who is included in not only who we want to purchase it, that we want their money, but so that we're designing something that will work effectively for them and not have them feel alienated or have undue burden. With facial recognition, it's a lot more likely to misinterpret a Black woman's face than it is a white male face, and people are detained, and they're in the United States at least, they're pulled over and stopped and questioned, and it's just one more layer for that same group of difficulty. So think about those kinds of things throughout your entire curriculum, within any one course, and then within an assignment, right? Who are the stakeholders that are your intended users, right? Who should be represented? Are you really representing them? Are your students representing them? Are they addressing it, right? And ask those questions. And ask yourself, do my assignments encourage lateral thinking? As engineers and going through school, we're taught deductive and inductive reasoning. But, so many things when students go out to go to work, they're not simple, and you can't assume away portions of the problem. You need lateral thinking, where you go out and you come back, and you go out and you come back. And are your assignments encouraging that kind of lateral thinking, of moving around the problem in a different way? Are these technologies that they're going to be creating problems for the marginalized individuals? Are you encouraging them to test not only a range of skin tones, but shapes, and ages and cognitive abilities, to see if it's something that is usable, useful, and desirable for all people? And then ask yourself, even when you start to drop into feedback and critique and assessment, do I need to broaden my questions to include universal design outcomes, right? Should I prompt my students to think about solutions being used by people from different cultures or have different perspectives? And does my assignment actually reinforce stereotypes in my students' thinking? Those are very important things. So that's when you're trying to create the engineer, but while they're there with you, you also need to think about, do I offer the people who learn in different ways, do I offer them a flexible approach to teaching and engaging with the material, right? Do I offer a different way to learn that content, or to express that they know something? So a different way to achieve that outcome, a different way of representing and expressing a learning outcome. Are you engaging them in active learning and encouraging them to see the value of the knowledge, the content knowledge, right? We don't want them to just to be able to regurgitate the information. We want them to be able to learn how to learn. In addition to learning what you're teaching them now, and them being able to apply it, you're teaching them how to learn and how to consume information. So it's not just that you're teaching them a direct piece of content in your specific discipline, but you're teaching them how they're going to be learning in the future, because things will be changing. Your choice of assignments influences what students will focus on. And more importantly, your choice of assessment will focus your students. And that will tell them what you value, right? Because if you don't assess it, it's not real to them. It doesn't matter how many times you say it's important. If it's not a part of the grade, if it's not a part of the assessment, then they're really not going to pay attention to it. Or it'll be a very unusual student who will. There are different types of assessment. I think we all know that. There's diagnostic. What do they know when they come in the door? Formative. What have they understood that I've just taught them? Summative. What have they learned at the end of this short progression? And then overall, when they're coming out of a course or maybe their capstone experience, what have they learned as a whole? We're very, in the United States, right? And many folks abroad use Bloom's taxonomy when we're talking about assessment and planning what we're trying to accomplish. With remembering being the lowest level, and the highest level of learning is thought to be about creating, evaluating and then creating. But Finks has a different model about the significance of learning outcomes, and puts in these ideas of the integration of different concepts. That's a very important thing. The application, right? So the application is like the blue over in the left. Do they have foundational knowledge? Are they learning how to learn? Right? You're teaching them how to learn and how they're going to discover new things and what they're going to perpetuate and what they're going to interrupt. But also in there is caring and a human dimension, right? So looking at the stakeholders and having empathy, and all of those pieces will create significant learning. So you can do some very simple things in order to align your assessments. When you look at your course learning outcomes, the different ways of assessing a particular type of learning, and then different resources, you can work through it just very simply. It's not complicated. It's just a matter of sitting down and making sure that as you go through each one of these things, you are intentional about including a universal design perspective in what you're doing and not marginalizing and not ignoring a particular group of people because they're inconvenient or they are seemingly difficult. So I want you to ask yourself this question when you are working with your students. Would a family member of mine be able to use their solutions if your family member had had a stroke or two? If your family member experienced asthma, has allergies, migraine, or has hemiplegic migraines where actually half of your body is paralyzed during the migraine, cluster headaches, which is apparently one of the worst headaches or worst pains there are. What if your family member had seizures or blood clots? Perhaps they don't have any cartilage in their knees and they can't use their knees very well, or they have a disc herniation or varicose veins. What if your family member is has a non-binary gender identity? And it was your family member. How would they experience your student's solution? Would they feel othered? Would they feel comfortable? Would they feel included? What if your family member had had cancer treatment and the cancer treatment had resulted in fatigue, chronic anemia, losing a portion of a limb, or a portion of a breast, or both? Or the cancer treatment had resulted in a speech impediment or a brain bleed in their frontal lobe, so they had no filter, or the cancer treatment had left them with brain fog, which means cognitive challenges, decreased situational awareness, decreased spatial awareness, decreased refresh rate so that they just don't take in information as quickly, decreased emotional regulation, decreased short-term memory, decreased higher order thinking skills, decreased processing speeds. So ask yourself, right, when we're talking about who are we engineering to support, we often want to design and engineer things for normal people. Well, normal people, what if that was your family? Would your students be designing something that they could use? Because that is my family. In the last year, and so when I ask, are you designing things that we can use? It's very personal to me. Are you going to turn out engineers who will be creating products and creating solutions and creating new ways of thinking and knowing that are going to support me, because it's going to go around the world. Just like the pandemic, their solutions that they're creating are going to help or harm all around the world. So why should you care beyond that? Money. If you can sell to more people, you'll make more money. Also, there's an increasing demand for it as all of these different societies age, right? A lot of the things that we're talking about are also naturally occurring with age. There's a large chunk of our society in the United States that has some limitation or a very large limitation. So about 46 million people have functional limitations, and things are more cost effective if you only have to have one thing instead of two. So if you take the perspective and take the framework that universal design should be applied throughout these different aspects of your not just your curriculum, but your courses and your places and your policies and your attitudes and your feedback and your assessment, I think you're going to find that your students will be able to have engineering processes that they will take with them, that will drive solutions that will support varied populations, and that you will be able to support a variety of people in your engineering curriculum, and it will be better for everybody. So your students will be designing your future environments, products, experiences, processes. They're going to be designing your society and my world. And you'll have to reflect, how will you have taught them to think? So that's what I have. If you have, we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, sure, Professor. We have a little bit of time to some questions, and we would like to thank you again for your presentation. You are amazing. You transport me to Minneapolis again. I felt in Minneapolis again. I lived all things that you showed to us this night. It's very interesting, all areas of universal design, because we need to solve a lot of problems like engineering. And so we need to identify the problems that we need to solve. So your presentation was very clear to us how to find the problem, how to identify the problem, how to solve the problem. That is the main idea of this, this subject. So I have some questions. Firstly, probably people that are watching on YouTube have some questions. Professor Valdez have some questions also. I saw that you said...
Would you like me to stop sharing my screen?
Okay, feel so free.
Okay.
I saw in your presentation that we have some ways to use the universal design. Firstly, you need to identify a problem or people or a person that needs to use this technology or gadgets or a lot of things. And after, you need a little bit of money to try to implement this. What is the role of the government to help to insert the universal design in the life of the people and the universities and schools and etc.?
Well, I think that that's definitely a societal question. If you look at Japan, the government there has been very instrumental in infusing universal design into many aspects of their society. In the United States, we have been lucky to have, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed and updated, right? And they are leaving it to the free market. I will say that if you look at the free market, those who are doing universal design well, like Apple, they're succeeding, right? So I don't want to get into politics here about, whether you need government regulation or not. But I will say that I think that if you churn out a generation of engineers and designers who are inclusive in their mindset and in their test beds and in their approach, then we will end up moving the needle, regardless of whether it is market-driven or government-driven.
Yeah, what's very interesting that you started to implement in the United States more or less in 1980, 1970, all right? And just now, 50 years later, we are starting to implement this in Brazil. So I guess we will have a lot of challenge to implement this, but with the acknowledgement that we are obtaining with you, and today, this night, we had learned a lot of things with you, and it's possible to use the technologies and to do some adaptations to use here with the the Brazilian scenario and a lot of things that we have here. Another thing, what resources are available to help teachers and administrators develop or find universally designed curriculum?
There were some citations that I had in my presentation, and the University of Buffalo has a tremendous amount of information that is available. And there are different organizations that specialize in looking at more at the physical aspect of universal design, which is where Buffalo is, but they have also the University of Buffalo. They also have started really digging into universal design for learning. I think that there's some great, there's some good articles even in the Insights for Higher Education, which is more of an administrator's. I'm going to say magazine. I won't call it a journal, but Insights for Higher Education has addressed some of it. And then there's a book that is newly written called Design Justice, and it is a very contemporary look at how, and it isn't really, it speaks around universal design, but it speaks to how we engineer in and design in problems for people because we don't look at all those different stakeholders. And it's a very different resource. I would really encourage folks to read that. It's not a light read, but it's not a hard read either. And then the another recommendation is Dartmouth College. They have a lot of good resources also, and they have them. They're just free and available and on the web.
Okay. Did you have any resistance to implement the universal design at the universities and at schools?
Less resistance implementing universal design at the university. A little bit of challenge because of funding, right? And any change requires funding, right? There is more, I've met more resistance in communities questioning why are we doing these things, right? Why are you spending my tax dollars to create curb cuts, right? That curb is already there, it's already in place. Why are you wasting money that could be going to our school system? And then I come back 20 years later to that same individual who made those comments, and their husband has had multiple strokes, has had cancer, a brain bleed as a result of it, is a wheelchair user now. That person, that her knees are bad, so she has a hard time pushing her husband. And you know what? She is grateful for those curb cuts, and she is grateful for those handicap parking spaces, and she is grateful for those doors that open automatically. So sometimes the community, they have their other priorities, and because they are not exposed to educators who ask them these difficult questions, and asking somebody, who are you excluding, can be a very, very difficult question, right? Critiquing something correctly is a real skill, because people hear the bad much stronger than they hear the good. And so you can ask them one thing and tell them they did one thing wrong, and that's what they'll hear. And you can be telling them all this other good stuff too, right? So these are some of the things I talk about. They seem very simple when you're talking about them in a presentation, but when you're looking the student in the eye and you're asking them these questions, it is very difficult. I encourage you to make it very personal, because it is personal. right? And there are, I've always, when I taught human-centered design and universal design, I always used examples from my life. And it resonated with the students. They remembered it. And years later, they would come back and they would tell me, I remember when you told me about your daughter doing so-and-so. I remember when you told me about, you know, your husband doing this, or your grandmother. And so I think, you know, so often we try and remain professional, right? And I'm not saying be unprofessional, that's different. But we try so hard to be professional that we forget to be personal. And to me, engineering and design is very, very personal, because we are making our societies for good or for bad, and it takes decades to change a society. So I give you guys a lot of credit for embarking on it, and you guys will get to leapfrog past all the mistakes that we have made along the way and learn from them and get right to it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Just one more question of
Yes.
my part. What changes have you seen in schools or in the university where teachers have incorporated universal design?
Across the board, or in our college? I'll go with our college because I'm most familiar with it. Empathy for the students and focusing on not just pushing them hard because they were pushed hard, but getting them to think and reflect and understand that their health has to come first, and that if they don't sleep, they won't be creative. So for me, the empathy associated with how we approach universal design, so that we can include everyone, is really the biggest change. And in our college, we are incredibly collegial, and people are just short of ostracized if they are abusive of the students.
Okay, Professor Sharon, thank you so much again. Professor Valdez, if you have some questions, feel so free.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Professor Sharon, for your presentation. Thank you for sharing with us a little bit of your expertise in universal design. I have just one question. In your opinion, do you think the universal design really helps the student to think more broadly?
I don't think it helps them think more broadly. I think it provides them with structure to not overlook things. I think it is the professors that get them to think more broadly, and to get them to do the lateral thinking. But I don't think it's the universal design that does that.
Okay. I think that is it. That is it, Claudio. I have no more questions.
Well, I get.
So-
Can I answer that a different way? I think it gets them to think more broadly about more people, and not just think about people like themselves. So from that perspective, universal design definitely gets them to think more broadly, from the people perspective. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is very interesting here, that here, not in Brazil, but mainly here in the Amazon region that we are inserted here in the north of Brazil, we have to learn a lot with you. And when you start to share your experiences, your expertise, we will help you you will help us a lot of with your experience. So we need to increase a lot of things here in the university with the major, with the city hall, with the government, the politicians. So we need to make a lot of adaptations here in university, in the city, to start to insert the universal design. Because if you teach the universal design at the university, but you are not applying in the real life, it's
Right.
very complicated, because we have to learn to apply, to bring a lot of developments to the people, to the population of our city, in the country. So I guess we have a lot of work to do here. And in the future, I guess you can help us. And if you want to visit us in Brazil next year or in the future, feel so free. You are very welcome to come here. Thank you so
I would
much,
love that.
Professor Sharon.
Thank you for inviting me. And I wish you guys the best, and just keep working at it. You know, take on one project at a time, one success at a time, and I'm sure your students will appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Professor.
Bom, pessoal, espero que todos tenham apreciado, né, essa noite de muito conhecimento, né? Quero agradecer novamente a professora Sharon, agradecer ao professor Cláudio pelo auxílio aqui na condução do evento. Então, espero que todos tenham gostado bastante, né? E desejo a todos uma boa noite, né? E um bom descanso, né? See you later, Sharon.
All righty. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one, everyone.